Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to EnviroTech Day 2. Hope everyone had a great night. Just some quick housekeeping. Presentations are being uploaded as I speak, so I'm hoping tonight or tomorrow or on the weekend I'll get an email out with everyone with the link to where the videos are. So just appreciate your patience with that. It's taking some time to process all the videos. They're fairly long. And I will the first session today is technology, and our moderator is Bill Burzens, who you heard yesterday speak with West Earth Sciences. I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and Bill will moderate for the next 2 hours, and I'll be back at the very end. Bill, oh no, sorry, Bill, you have control.
All right, Joe, thanks very much. Can everybody see me and hear me?
Yep, it's good.
Yes. Wonderful. Our team's coming to you from beautiful downtown Edmonton and beautiful downtown Calgary. We've found a way to set aside our football and hockey differences, and we've come together to give you a very interesting and informative session on technology this morning. So I wanted to start with just a safety moment. Normally, if we had a meeting, I'd be pointing out where the fire extinguishers and the restrooms and the exits are. Many of you are working from home, so you probably have figured that out over the last 3 or 4 months. So my safety moment is really about COVID, and just a reminder to everybody, first of all, there's a lot of resources out there available to people through Alberta Health. We know that a lot of you are suffering stress as a result of the West Texas Intermediate meltdown, as well as COVID and isolation. And my message to you this morning is don't forget about social isolation and distancing. A lot of people are suffering right now from caution fatigue and saying, I'm sick and tired of being careful. Please don't stop being careful. So this morning, that's our safety moment. I'm going to turn the floor over to Amit Bhargava. I apologize for mispronouncing that. And Amit will be talking about waste and water use tracking and compliance management system. And I'll ask Amit to give a brief introduction to himself. And I have to now turn it over to Amit.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amit Bhargav. I'm a co-founder of EnviroApps. I have more than 20 years of environmental regulatory experience in various roles such as consulting, engineering, procurement, construction companies, as well as industry side. And that's where actually we started developing this system. Was a pain point that I was dealing with as a user and could not solve this issue. And so we developed a solution, and that's what we are here to talk about today. So let me just turn that to full screen. Okay, so before we start, here's a quick introduction to what we do. As EnviroApps, the company that I have co-founded, we help companies remain compliant with regulatory requirements, at the same time taking the pain away from environmental compliance professionals by using technology instead of relying on manual and Excel-based processes, thereby reducing costs, which is very important these days. We have developed a sleek digital solution called Easy to track hazardous waste, dangerous goods, and water use. With every company currently going back or planning to go back to work soon, I think there is a real opportunity here to go forward to work, like Keith Ferrazzi said. Let's consider the current state of environmental compliance in the light of a pandemic, something we have all recently experienced and are not out of the woods yet. Fortunately, most reporting submissions these days happen through digital means. Our provincial government has also relaxed the regular reporting requirements. However, it is important to note that the suspension of regular submissions does not absolve companies of any responsibilities related to environmental compliance. So all rules are in effect. A few weeks ago, I made myself a list of paper-based processes that still exist in this 21st century. And it is a pretty short list, of which environmental management plans and emergency response plans are entirely within a company's purview to digitize. It is only transportation of dangerous goods and waste manifesting that most jurisdictions still do not allow electronically. Things are moving in the right direction though these days, I have to say. Bill of lading or truck tickets are also mostly dealt in paper form. And water use tracking and reporting is another area where most companies still use paper forms to collect data and Excel to manage compliance with Water Act requirements. As you know, Alberta's oil and gas sector is regulated by Alberta Energy Regulator, and Directive 58 sets out the requirements for tracking of hazardous waste from cradle to grave. Manifesting is handled through Alberta Oilfield Waste Form. Directive 58 also requires that manifests are stored for a minimum of 2 years, and AER can request any generator of waste to provide annual waste disposition report within 30 days. If AER finds companies in violation of Directive 58 requirements, they can fine them as much as $500,000. Alberta Energy Regulator has allowed the use of electronic manifests since 2015, so that's almost 5 years now. However, there has not been any serious uptake by companies, and most manifesting still happens through 4 carbon copies of paper manifests. AEP has similar requirements, and other provinces have a similar manifest form. Federal manifests are used by provinces that do not have their own form and for intra-provincial movement of waste. In case anyone has not seen an Alberta oilfield waste form, here it is. So generator completes most of the information, which is part A. Transporter provides custody transfer in part B, and receiver completes the remaining part C. Imagine how much of the information would be readable from the 4th carbon copy. Keep in mind, it will also fade over time. Now, let's look at the water use problem. Any company that wishes to withdraw water from a surface water body or groundwater in Alberta must obtain a water withdrawal license under the Water Act. There are 2 kinds of licenses that are issued: temporary diversion licenses called TDLs or Water Act licenses. Both kinds of licenses have monitoring and reporting conditions attached to them. License holders are required to report usage and/or level every month through Alberta's water use reporting system, frequently called WURS. Most companies still use manual and paper-based processes to comply with the requirements, which has inherent risks. Very recently, on March 31st, AER charged Tamarack Valley Energy under the Water Act. And if you look at AER's compliance dashboard, several companies have been issued notice of non-compliance and several administrative penalties. So there's a problem that exists today. So a number of challenges that exist today. Most companies are in the same boat though. Systems and processes around hazardous waste and water use tracking are obsolete in light of a pandemic situation when most of us are working from home. Also, paper could be a transmission pathway, and manual data entries prone to human errors. Business as usual is archaic to say the least. Also, there is a lot of duplication of efforts at every stage of the process with no visibility and real-time updates. We have estimated almost $40 to $60 for every single waste manifest that a company on the generator end spends, and similarly at the receiver end spends to deal with all the data and back and forth and reconciliation and reporting. In my opinion, this is an unacceptable risk of non-compliance that companies are taking, and that too when technology solutions are available which actually save costs. So Easy to Track is one such solution that is proven and cost effective. It is cloud-based, which makes it accessible anywhere. The app has been designed keeping field personnel in mind and is quite easy to use and intuitive. It is also mobile friendly, so you can use it on your tablet. The solution is compliant with applicable regulatory requirements and has built-in analytics that roll up and filter dynamically. Easy to Track is a comprehensive solution and has all of Canada's waste manifest forms, TDG shipping documents, and water use tracking at one place. There is no upfront capital investment required, and the return on investment is quick. Here's how Easy to Track's scope looks like. So this suite of software can help you track all these movements of hazardous waste, dangerous goods, as well as water usage. Let's look at the example. At the drilling rig, fuel is usually being brought that needs to be tracked. So, and as part of the operations, water may be required. So water usage needs to be tracked. And when hazardous waste is generated, it needs to be tracked from cradle to grave. So this is a nice and comprehensive solution to deal with all these tracking requirements. Seeing is believing. So I would now take everyone through a live demonstration next. Please bear with me while I switch screens. Can everyone see my screen there with Easy to Track? Just wanted to make sure.
We are seeing it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just didn't want to go through the entire demo and not have anybody see it. Okay, so this is kind of the landing page for our for the software Easy to Track, and it provides a lot of analytics at the front end for user, which may be useful for identifying trends. So as you can see here, it identifies the top 5 waste codes that are being used. It can also deal with some of the cost items and also quantities. And as you can see, the quantities are separated into solids and liquids here. So this is just one of the reports that you can see, and all these are can be copied and moved into any of your external or internal reports as you like. So let's go through a demo of a new manifest, how that would get generated. And we can look at the AER manifest. So you click on the new document, and the manifest ID is auto-populated. This needs to be a unique number. That's a AER Directive 58 requirement. So based on the user login, the company name, the BA code, all that can be pulled from the database. And then the user needs to select where this is being generated at. Once you select that, the license number can also be pre-populated based on the facility location. You need to pick a transporter. Once you do that, you need to select a receiver, not picking any favorites. Let's go into a generic one. And you can also select multiple receiving locations if there are available. Just for saving time, I'm just using one that is default. And here you can, so all your 24-hour emergency numbers are there. And this is the area where you can upload a waste characterization report. So if you have lab analysis, you can easily upload that. And then manifest scan. So this is not required for AER, but if you like to scan and store your manifest, you can do that. And this comes in later when there is any discrepancy between the amounts, and you can basically have all that documentation uploaded here. So once you get all that sorted, then you can select the waste code that you're shipping, and you have the option to attach a waste profile sheet from CAP. If you do not have a waste characterization report, you can use one from CAP. All this data gets pre-populated. This is where most users make mistakes, and we have streamlined that, and that can be set at the pre-population. That can all be set at the implementation stage. So we put in the quantity shipped, unit shipped, packaging, and basically we have completed manifest part A, and we can submit that. Similarly, at this point, the trucker, or rather the transporter, as well as the receiver, would get a automated email notification saying this load is ready to be shipped, and that gives a lot more heads up, and everybody can plan their work. So that's another important benefit to consider. So the shipping document is ready, and the workflow then involves the trucker filling their form, and it goes on. But I will just show you how that manifest looks like. And there is another neat feature to clone the AER manifest. So if you have a manifest and you're, say, this is very important when you're considering all the potential remediation reclamation work that might be happening in the 3 Western provinces. You can easily clone the manifest, and it is only 3 clicks. And if the same load is going 20 times a day, it can make it really efficient. And here's what I will show you. This is a copy of the manifest that just got created in the PDF form. It can be printed if you want to send it with the waste. So as you can see, this is in the exact AER format, and it has all the copies marked. This one is the transporter copy, and the signature for the user can also be pre-populated. And then receiver to generator copy, and this is the back copy there. So that kind of completes, or rather, a high-level overview. Now let's look at some of the reports that we can generate. There's lots of reports. Here's the one that is the most important one. So in case AER asks you to provide a report, this is what companies look for, and it is basically a click of a button, and you can, and it is exact format as DDS would accept. So this can be a big pain to deal with if you get selected for the audit and you need to produce this report. And if you're using a system like this, it is very quick and no effort at all. And we can then, there's lots of other reports, such as the receiving site report, which provides you all these graphs, and you can filter by quantities and all that. So there's lots of options from a data analysis point of view. So now let's move on quickly to water tracking piece. So we can set up a new TDL by coming in here. Let's say test June 12th, and give it a number, whatever the AER has issued, and select the water use. It's for dust control. It has an end date, so we'll leave it as default. And then here's your point of diversion, and it's a borough pit. Let's say it's 20,000 meter cube diversion rate. Sorry, volume, total volume you can take. And here's the diversion rate is, let's say, maximum 20 meter cube a day. So we are just setting up the TDL requirements here, and we can basically set up, we can include, attach it to the facility, which facility this is going to be used at, and we save this TDL. So once you've saved the TDL, now we need to go into a water tracking form. So this is where you can basically bring that TDL and connect the two, and you can start tracking your water usage. So we just created that. So let's say click that, and company name, whichever is your transporter or hauler for water, and you can select your users. So this is where the emails would go to, and they can basically enter that data on their cell phones. The form is designed in such a way, and you can turn that to active. All this is built-in checklist, and you can see all the details here. And this is where you can add the volume basically. So let's say we drew this much water and it is now being recorded. So the system will alert you as the TDL expiry date approaches or any of their conditions get approached. This will provide a more like automated email notifications and all that. So there's lots of reports here. Just one I will show. This is where all the water usage is being tracked, and this can be reported, and the users can take actions as required. So I think that completes the water use tracking as well. Very quick high-level overview, and we can go back to the presentation here. So next, I would like to present some cost-benefit analysis for an E&P company. Let's say they needed to track about 3,500 manifests a year. That would cost almost 175,000, and it does take almost 1 to 2 full-time people to maintain that proper documentation, reconciliation, and the annual reporting. And a similar cost is also borne at the receiver end. And so if a E&P company utilizes Easy to Track, they can immediately reduce their cost by about half. And that means a ROI, combined ROI of more than 400% for the industry. So besides the compliance cost reduction piece, I would also like to present some results from a case study based on a 5-year data set from one of our clients. We analyzed data from more than 30,000 manifests by calculating actual road distances between the source site location and receiving site location pairs and compared them to optimum distances, which is defined as the road distance to the closest receiving site location that can handle that particular waste. What we found was that 60% of the time, the waste went to the optimum receiving site location. However, an opportunity exists to optimize the rest 37%. Using a $190 per hour cost of transportation, everything else being equal, there could have been a total saving of more than 900,000 in 5 years. This would translate to more than 300% ROI. This is in addition to the time cost savings of one person's annual work hours, another greater than 100% ROI. So here are a few key takeaways. Digital solutions to replace the existing manual and paper-based processes offer immediate and significant payoff, and the timing is now. Most digital solutions don't require capital investment and are based on software as a service delivery model. The digital solutions pay back for the incurred costs several times by adding value throughout the workflow, besides significantly lowering the risk of non-compliance. In today's world, we require remote implementation, ease of use with little to no training, which comes standard with digital solutions. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks very much. I've got a quick question for you while I wait for any other questions to arrive. Don't have any coming in yet, but how many transactions are you currently processing with the system on an annual basis, roughly?
So over the past 3 years, we have had something around 200,000 manifests in the system. So
excellent. And then is there
65,000? Yeah.
Is there a mechanism to, is it on an Android or a handheld device or a tablet so somebody completes it in the field?
Absolutely, it can be Android or iPad. Either we are agnostic to which tablet it is.
Excellent. And then also, can you attach a QR code to a load or a barrel or a drum or whatever, and then scan the QR and then also photo document?
So photo document option is there. QR
Excellent.
code is pretty much under development. So we'll get there. That's on our roadmap.
Very good. Amit, I don't have any other questions in, but one thing that I was wondering, are you staying around a little bit longer? Because if we're ahead of the game, we'll have a few minutes at the end of today's session to answer
Yeah,
any
I will be
questions.
around. I will be around. Yeah.
So folks, if you still have any other questions, feel free to send them to me. I'll move on to the next presentation and keep it moving, and then we'll hopefully have some time for questions afterwards. So let's move on to our next presentation for John Debu, basically the WIN system, a suite of tools for resource management decision-making. And John, I'll just ask you to give people a little bit of a introduction to yourself, and we'll go from there.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Apparently not. Let's see here.
Yeah,
Yes,
I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
I just have to navigate now to your presentation.
Okay.
All right, we have a screen.
Yeah, if you give me control, I can.
You have control. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good. So my name is John Dew. I work for the government of Alberta and the Forest Management Division. I'm a forest
John, I don't think we
hydrologist.
have your screen.
Pardon me?
I don't think we have your screen.
Oh, okay.
Just give me a second. You should have a message on your screen that says share your desktop. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I work for the Forestry Division as a forest hydrologist, and one of three of us. Our job mostly is to scope around for tools that can be used for decision making. That's just part of our function. So this work, just a moment here. This work is part of that. I'm able to control this from here. Okay, I need to go to the beginning of my presentation here. Okay. Sorry about that. Now, the WIN system, WIN is an acronym for Wet Areas Mapping Integrated with NetMap. Okay. So we are all aware that the landscape in Alberta is a very busy landscape because of multiple resource pressures we have on the landscape. We have agriculture and forestry. That is one of the main functions of my department. A lot of activity going on regarding crop production, production, logging from forestry roads. These activities cause pressures on the landscape. There are other disturbances apart from these anthropogenic disturbances like floods and wildfires. Of late, these have been really very frequent in Alberta. These put pressures on the landscape as well. There is oil and gas activities at various scales. And apart from that, when we work hard, we like to take some time and entertain myself and entertain ourselves and our families. And this puts pressures on the landscape as well. So what happens is that all these pressures put together cause a cumulative impact on the landscape. Each of the pressures causes a sort of impact. And when they are all put together, we have an cumulative effect on the landscape. Now, one of the strategies to manage these cumulative effects is, first of all, by legislation. We have within the government of Alberta, we have a number of legislation for helping to do that. We have the nutrient management policy, the forest management policy, the water for life strategy, the land use framework. These are just examples of some of the legislative strategies for managing these cumulative effects. Other strategies are to have BMPs, beneficial management practices, in place. These are basically rules or structures or systems that are placed on the landscape to manage the effect of these pressures. Other means to manage these impacts are by means of enforcing monitoring and compliance. So when you monitor, you know how much your activity is causing an impact. And therefore, when you know how much it is, you can set thresholds within what your activity should take place to minimize that impact. And the last but not the least is all the legislation, BMPs, and monitoring are supported with tools. And that's where the WIN system comes in. Now, if you look in the literature, there are many definitions of cumulative effects. People have all kinds of definitions there, but what we base this work on is what I've just brought up here, which says that it's an interaction of natural and man-made processes on the landscape as we use the resources that can cause negative effects on ecosystem processes in both space and time. And schematically, what this definition looks like is this. So in a watershed, you can have two processes at a particular location. So we have one process taking place currently, and you are going to the same location, you're going to implement another process. So at the same location, these two processes are going to result in a cumulative impact, and that is the overlapping effect. There's also the cumulative accumulating impact, which is this: that's you in the same watershed, you have an activity currently taking place in a sub-watershed in that watershed. And then you plan to put another activity in an adjacent sub-watershed in the same watershed. So what will happen is that when the effect of the existing practice moves through the watershed, once you implement the new activity, its effect will also be transported through the watershed. And at some point in time and in space, these two effects will overlap somewhere within the watershed. So they will be accumulating at that location. And the third view of the definition of cumulative effects that we have is based on what we call the space-time shift. So it's basically a shift in the probability distribution of that activity. So you have an activity in time t1, and then when another activity takes place, that distribution of the impact in time t2 will be different. When the distribution shifts, that's a statistical effect. But statistical effects are representation of physical effects. So when the distribution shifts, it means there's a change on the landscape and an impact on the ecosystem. Okay, so for instance, if we take a forest, this is the age of the forest. After a certain number of years, say 50 years or 100 years, the age of the forest will change. So that's another version of cumulative effects. So we are looking at cumulative effects from these 3 points of view. So to help us to do this, we ask ourselves, what in-house tools and what third-party tools are out there that we can actually utilize to be able to develop these tools, basically special decision tools that can help address these cumulative impacts. In-house, we have wet areas mapping. This is public data. It's available. Anybody who wants this data can always write to the government of Odeta and get access to the data. So what this data is that there is a DEM, it's basically LiDAR data. So there's a DEM, and there's a stream network that we have extracted from this from the data. So we have a DEM. You can access the DEM on its own, or we have stream data which you can access as well. So if we have third-party data that we can overlay on these two data sets, then we will be able to generate some decision tools that decision makers can use to inform decisions on the landscape. So I said wind system means wet areas mapping integrated with NetMap. So the third-party data sets that we access is the NetMap data set. So NetMap is basically what we call a virtual watershed system. Virtual watershed is a digital watershed system which has embedded in it a number of processes and number of applications. So I have here an example of a virtual watershed, which is available on NetMap. So we have, for instance, you can predict locations and diversions of linear features like roads and pipelines, where you can locate them without having negative impacts. If there is an existing road, you can, excuse me, I may have to go back and just to explain what this is about here. Okay, if there's an existing road, you can use this tool to analyze what is happening on the landscape around that existing road. You can simulate processes on a hill slope, and you can move those processes along streams and along adjacent hill slopes until you get to a location in the watershed where decisions need to be made. So that's accumulating impacts of cumulative effects. So various tools within the NetMap desktop digital watershed. So in developing this tool, we use the stream network of the wet areas mapping draped around this digital watershed. So how did this process develop? So here we have the stream network from our wet areas mapping. And the way this is generated is that at every junction of any streamlines, we have a node. Okay, so we identify these nodes and we define what we call a drainage wing between any two nodes. So at B, between these two nodes, we have a drainage wing. And then when you have drainage wings at each of these, between any two nodes in A, you end up with a schematic that shows and see here. So between any two nodes, you have a spatial delineation. The drainage wing is not just on the land surface, but all the space around it. Now, you can drape a road or a pipeline along any series of drainage wings. Okay, so when you do that, the linear feature intersects with those series of drainage wings. So if you want to analyze an effect of that linear feature, you analyze on the drainage wings that overlap that pipeline. Now with drainage wings over the entire watershed, then you have your digital watershed. So you end up with your data, for instance, your climate data, your land use data, your soils data, all that overlaid in your digital watershed, and then that data at a particular location provides you information that you can integrate from one location to the next. So at any particular hill slope, you can decide what the erosion processes are based on climate, the soils, and the land use within any drainage wing. And look at drainage wings that join. So for instance, if you take this particular stream, the number of drainage wings you define along this. So within each drainage wing, you will look at the erosion processes in each of those drainage wings and integrate those downstream along this stream. And all the drainage wings within this watershed will be integrated as you move downstream. So you will basically be taking decisions within the drainage wing which you integrate throughout the watershed. So one of the things you can do is that, so whatever terrestrial processes that are taking place, erosion processes within the aquatic environment, things like habitat decisions, you can do that within a series of drainage wings, which you can look at over the entire watershed. Okay, so this is another view of the same thing that I've just explained. So the blue line, first of all, the broken line is your DEM from your LiDAR data, the wet areas mapping data, and over that we have a stream layer. So I know at various points in this DEM, you define your grid points. Okay, so the grid points joined to have your digitized stream, which represents the blue line, which is your actual stream. Okay, so between any two of these, you have your drainage wing. So when you look at this particular stream, the drainage wings, excuse me, for some reason, just things. Okay, so the drainage wings for this particular stream will look like there's the yellow lines represent the drainage wings in between any two of these nodes. So your decisions, your land use decisions and management decisions are taken basically within each drainage wing and integrated from one drainage wing downstream. And when you look at all the streams in a particular watershed, then you can integrate for each stream downstream as they connect, they connect in a network of streams throughout the watershed. Okay. So all of what with this information, you have your DEM overlaid with your stream network, and the information you use for delineating the stream network is the flow. I mean, you need to set a threshold to identify what the level of these draining wings are. Okay, so you have your flow accumulation threshold that you use to identify what the drainage wings are for each stream. You end up with your river network and connect all your river networks into a digitized hill slope. On each digitized hill slope, there is a number of features and a number of land use activities. This also, on each hill slope, you have some landforms. Okay, so landforms are part of your data, your climate data, your land use data, and you attribute all that from one location to the next downstream. So this is the overall view all over the watershed. So the wind system consists of a number of features, elements. There's a scale element, there's a landform element, there's a land use element. Okay, all these are data that you will need to build your wind system. And there are physical processes and biological processes taking place within the system, within each drainage wing, or adjacent to a number of adjacent drainage wings. You have either a habitat, fisheries habitat, or some terrestrial habitat. Okay, so there are processes within those series of drainage wings. And there are a number of connections because each drainage wing is defined in between two nodes. And all that is accumulating from one point of the location of the watershed downstream. So they accumulate and aggregate downstream. Land uses overlap and the processes overlap. So this is a physical view of the wind system. The digital watershed that NetMap is consistent of has about 100 tools that any developer can take advantage of depending on your needs and your applications. For us, the wind system that we have developed at this stage uses two tools. There's an erosion tool and there's a stream assessment tool. In the future, we have plans to add other tools that can enhance the system. So of these 100 tools, the developer can take advantage of any ones that will serve their needs. If riparian management is what your priority is, there's a tool for that. And you define your drainage wings, and you can identify riparian buffers within each drainage wing, and those join as the stream network moves downstream. These tools can be used for channel gradient assessment. If you want to do sediment transport or habitat assessment, this is very important. Aquatic and terrestrial habitat assessment, basically quality of the assessment and how diverse they are. Fluvial processes can be assessed as well, and so on. You can use it to decide how you lay roads and seismic lines on the landscape. Now, after a wildfire, there are tools that you can use within this digital network for digital watershed for post-fire assessments. What the wildfire impacts are as far as erosion is concerned, as far as drinking water impacts are concerned, and other impacts of the wildfire. There are tools also for climate change vulnerability assessment within this digital watershed. So now I'm going to just quickly on how the scales work. So the wind system, as we develop it, can work either at the hill slope scale. That's a series of drainage networks comprising that hill slope, or in a stream segment. So if you are interested in the habitat assessment in a particular stream segment, you can use it for that. Or for a road assessment, okay, or a very small watershed scale. Basically what you do is that the drainage wings that comprise the watershed are assessed and integrated into that small watershed, or a series of watersheds. And you can even use it for a series of watersheds that can be integrated into larger watersheds, like the Old Man or the Bow. Okay, so I'm just going to show very quickly what the result of our erosion tool is. So the erosion tool that we developed under the wind system is called the READY tool. So it's basically an road erosion sedimentation tool, READY representing road erosion and assessment identification. Each of the 100 tools in the virtual watershed is based on peer-reviewed science. Okay, for the READY tool, The work, the theory behind it is published in a recent article in the Journal of the American Water Resources Association. Anybody who is interested in finding out some more about this tool or any of the other tools, it's very easy to access that information. Now, we know that for linear features, whether roads, resource roads, forestry roads, oil and gas roads, or just seismic lines or on the landscape, these tend to be sources of sediment that is delivered to streams. So in the absence of wildfire, there is always sediment generated from these linear features. Studies in the past have shown that these are the biggest sources of sediment on the landscape. So for landscape decisions, we want to be able to identify where the sources of these sediments are, how to prioritize and remediate these erosion processes at these locations and minimize the sediment delivery to water bodies. This schematic I've just brought up is an element or a segment of a linear feature, whether a road or a seismic line. The segment has length LR and width WR. Suppose that the precipitation happens on the surface of this element. Sediment is generated from overland flow that is carried into a ditch, and that eventually generates a plume from the linear feature into the nearest water body. That plume is of length P and of width P, of length LP and width WP. Okay, so in the ready tool, the goal is to access where this plume is going to be generated along the road segment, what the length of the plume is, and what the width of the plume is. We want to optimize the characteristics of this plume so that sediment deposition along this part of the landscape is more efficient before that sediment is delivered into a water body, a stream, downstream somewhere. Okay, so that's basically a simple philosophy behind the ready tool. So how much sediment is generated from this road will generate this plume. So the amount of runoff and the amount of sediment determines the length of this plume and the width. So how do we, what decisions can we take as along this segment of the road so that we minimize the plume length and the plume width so that sediment is settled before it's delivered into the water body. To calibrate this tool, we had to do some field experiments. Some experiments were run in the Grand Prairie area in the Seminole watershed, as well as the Old Man watershed, a number of streams in the Old Man watershed. So this picture is just one of the experiments that was carried out to get information to identify what plume lengths and plume widths are optimal for us to for sediment deposition along streams in that watershed. This is another setup that this one is in the Old Man watershed. So for the same purpose, we have a ditch here along the road. So this is where sediment collects and is going to be delivered to water body, somewhere downstream of this road. So this experiment was to determine what the plume length is, for this particular watershed. Bear in mind, the plume length depends on a number of factors: the soils, the climate, the topography, and other factors. So out of the experiments that were carried out in the Grand Prairie and Old Man watershed, it's found that for plume lengths, for most of the plume lengths are around about 6 meters to about 25 meters length. There are fewer longer plume lengths and fewer shorter plume lengths. Okay, so this shows what the sediment generation is for this particular watershed. I believe this is one of the sub-watersheds in the Old Man. Okay, so here the colors show the sediment generation in the watershed at various locations along linear features in this watershed. So the maximum sediment generation is 1,000 kilograms per year. Okay. Now, so this is where 100% of the road surfaces are generating sediment. Now, if we can optimize the plume length in a way that only sections of the road surface is generating sediments into the plume, we will be able to reduce that sediment delivered to streams by a certain amount. How much is reduced depends on the decisions of road segments we identify, and so what the plume lengths will be. So in this schematic, we have a plume sediment being generated at various locations in this watershed. Here, about 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms per year of sediment from these red locations.
John, I'm going to recommend to you that you go to your summary slide, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm almost done.
I don't want you to rush through everything, because that will put us over for sure and not give you time for a good closure. So I'd like you to be able to go to your summary and conclusions, and then then we'll have to move on. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I just have 2 slides to end this. So here we have sediment locations, sediment generations at the various locations in this watershed, and based on, but not all the sediment is delivered to water bodies. Okay, so there's sediment production at locations, but not all of it is delivered. So if for this road system element here, we have locations of stream crossings. Okay, there are a number of stream crossings here. So this particular study identified that if we added a crossing at this location here, it's going to reduce the plume length that will transport sediment to any of the water bodies that cross this road network here. Okay, so with the addition of this crossing, it was found that even those sediment is generated in this on this road, only about 38% of that sediment actually ends up in the nearest water body. It means about 62% is not. Is it possible to reduce this sediment delivery even further? So by introducing a crossing, additional crossing at this location, first of all, we reduce the road length, the road segment length that will generate sediment, and by that we reduce the plume length. So after the drain has been introduced, the percentage delivery of sediment has been reduced from 38% to about 5%, a little over 5%. So this has improved the efficiency of sediment settling before delivery into the water bodies around this this particular road network. The study in the Old Man watershed found that whilst 70% of the sediment leaves only 9% of the road networks, this percentage can be reduced considerably by this schematic that was just demonstrated here, either by reducing the number of crossings or by introducing more crossings along the road network. You can improve sediment management and reduce sediment delivery by as much as 80%.
Hey, John, is this your closing slide?
That's right. So the watershed decision tools can be used to identify and point source pollution, basically erosion sources. It can identify risks at different scales, whether at the drainage wing level, that's the hill slope, or the watershed level. It can be used to prioritize for inspections. So it will identify to you what the biggest sources of sediment are, and then you can decide what remediation you can put in place. It can be used to identify restoration opportunities. Okay, so if you identify which are the priority sources, then you can put in place management tools that can reduce that sediment delivery. The cumulative effect tools can be used for watershed integrity and water quality management, and for land use cumulative effects management. And they provide other decision tools for decision making on the landscape. And this basically uses data that is already available, but it also uses third-party tools, which unfortunately is proprietary, but it can be accessed if anybody is interested to do that. So the wind system is a very useful tool. You, as a user, will decide what you want to, what tools you want to develop within the wind system for your own needs. So if anybody is interested in digging some more into this, you can let us know. We'll put you in touch with the right people. And that's it.
Okay, thanks very much, John. We won't have time for questions right now, but are you staying around for the balance of the morning?
Yes, I will be around. If anybody can just
so
send me a message and we'll do that.
If we have some time left, and we'll be able to deal with any questions. We'll move on to our next presenter right away. It'll be Jason Hampson talking about regulator variance requests.
Thanks, Phil. I just want to check that my sound and presentation's up there all right.
Looks good, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about regular variance requests and using them as a tool for site closure. So I'll get into more detail as we go, but a little on my background on myself. I've been an environmental consultant for about the last 20 years, focused mainly on assessment remediation. So I have a pretty extensive background in looking at a lot of different sites, a lot of different contaminants. So I kind of use that background to apply towards these variance requests. So with the presentation today, I'll talk a bit about the problem we're facing, a little introduction, and then I'll go the main portion. I'll go through some successful case studies we've had, then go over some value and learnings that have come out of that, and open things up to any questions that anybody might have. So with the problem we're facing, as we all know, on the side of abandoned well sites, the numbers change every day, but it's well over 100,000 abandoned well sites that are on the books in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and with that, only a few thousand reclamation certificates every year. So this is just looking at one of the tools that we can apply to sites to move them along quicker. It's not the silver bullet to answer everything, but definitely something that on the right site can be quite helpful. So with that problem, we also have new closure drivers that are coming on. There's a higher demand than ever before with regulators and with the public to close out these sites. There's timeline to closure that's on the horizon. There's area-based closures. And all this is going on with, as we know, a really large drop in industry budgets. So we have to figure out ways to do more with less, and this kind of ties into that. So with an introduction here, basically what I'm going to speak about is using this variance request as kind of a pipeline to have a direct contact with the regulator. Historically, there's been times where it's difficult being able to get in front of the right people to have these conversations to help move sites along. So this has really opened up a good avenue to do that. You get to the right contact and can have some discussions about these sites. So a lot of these sites that I'll talk about today, this photo here is an example of it. It's actually a very heavily contaminated site. As you can see, in the middle of a farmer's field, all you can see is kind of some wells poking out of the crop. But overall, like it's a healthy functioning site. There's been lots of assessment, lots of look at risk, and there's really no risk, but there would be considered huge impacts there. The sites that I'll talk about today are more on it's more of a minor problem site. You'll have a lot of sites that are kind of left in a limbo. There's been some assessment, some remediation, impacts still in place, and then what do you do? So that kind of what we focused on, and each of these sites that I'll talk about today has a guideline of exceedance of some kind, but we worked through a good plan of why they should be moved forward in the reclamation process. So with that, with these variance requests, we've done them in different scenarios, both pre and post remediation. You really have to pick the right site. It doesn't work for all sites. Again, it's not the silver bullet. It can be very helpful, especially on most of these sites today. I'm talking is on the remote and green zone sites that you have a lot of less stringent receptors. There's a lot of different guideline adjustment that you can work with. So some of the things we did were just looked at straightforward exceedance justifications, applied some depth to receptor adjustments, looked at groundwater, confirmed groundwater trends to show that it's stable and decreasing, and also utilized some existing guidelines in a kind of new and different manner. So now I'll go into, I've got 4 case studies that we worked through and kind of give an overview of how those worked out. So the first one, this is a very remote site, winter access only, or else fly in, helicopter access. So with this site, we had picked it up. Another consultant had worked on it, did quite a substantial remediation for that area, not overly large in tonnage, but 2,500 tons of methanol impacted soil was hauled to the landfill, again on winter ice roads. This here is the actual remedial excavation. It was left for a few years, and as you can see, it's just visually looks like a very well-functioning wetland. So that played into our planning as well. At the end of the day, there was about 2,500 tons removed from site, landfilled, and clean excavation. There was no clean extents, methanol in all walls and base, and they just ran out of budget, ran out of season, and just had to shut the project down. So we picked up the file, started looking at it, and just wasn't matching up to being something that you'd really want to keep chasing or mediate. So we started looking at what our options are and decided that before we kind of presented anything to the regulator, we needed more assessments. So we went in, did a drilling assessment, put in some groundwater monitoring wells, and basically we were finding methanol throughout the site, basically right up to tree line, as you can see in the background there. We were getting very unreliable results due to high moisture content. As you can see, it's muskeg, peat, and basically water right almost to surface. And we put in some wells and proved that in the groundwater there was no detectable methanol, nothing was moving. So that's when we kind of started developing this plan and going forward with the variance. So with that, if we were to have dug up that site, we would have been well over $1 million in costs, saved 350 trucks plus on the highway, and just made a good case that like it's not something that needed to be remediated. The damage, as you can see, this is the access road that's well established. We would have had to knock all that down again, and the whole winter access, and really built a case that there was no effect, there was no receptor, and really at the end of the day, I think the methanol we were picking up is more of a lab issue. There was a methanol tank there at one point, a small one, that to have that kind of impact, it's not possible. So we got agreement with that and just left the site as is, and then it moved on to reclamation, and basically the site is good to go. Next site is another remote green zone site. Very tough access to this site as well, winter access. We submitted a variance here pre-remediation. After the drilling, we identified barite barium in 2 of the sumps. There's multiple sumps on site. With that, we built a case that to focus on the true impacts. We discussed with the regulator that we would, and we got approval to exclude the wildlife and livestock ingestion pathway below 1.5 meters and focus just on remediating that top 1.5 meters and leaving the rest in place. As you can see, there's heavy clays there. That barite is not mobile. It's not accessible to any wildlife at those depths. So we capped it with clay and left it in place. So with that, about 250,000 in savings, reduced again trucks on the road to the landfill, and avoided reclamation setbacks by just limiting our area that we had to excavate and disturb. At the same time on this site, this ties in well, there was another quite large sump on the site that had hydrocarbon impacts. It didn't have the same barite, but it did have the hydrocarbons. And it really makes you think about kind of, is it worth the remediation disturbance? That's a question that I always come up against. You can see that's same area, the sump with hydrocarbons on the left, quite well established. The trees were coming back. Like it really builds a case of, is it worth, in a remote setting like this, we're chasing hydrocarbons that exceeded guideline, mainly the heavy end fractions, but really they're not going anywhere. They're not in contact. Is that the best decision? I don't have the answer for that, but it's just definitely something to consider. Same site again. This comes down, is it worth the cost? That's over a 3-day period in February that the fight we had to keep access open to the site. Very long access road, very heavy snows, a lot of wind. We got to the point where we basically had to keep that dozer on site to keep the road open 24 hours a day. So that just cost-wise is huge, obviously, but it also adds a whole level of safety. And is it worth that cost to have people in kind of those more dangerous situations? You have to have safety plans in place to contact that operator all night. You have to have somebody available to go out and get them if need be. So a lot goes into something like that. And again, is it worth burning that diesel to get to dig up something that may or it's very unlikely that it's any effect on the system there. So the next site, this one we did this variance request. It would be post remediation and even post reclamation. So another consultant did a lot of work on this site. You can see in those photos there was a lot of replanting done, over 2,500 trees replanted. There was slope restoration. There was quite a large 6,500 tons of impacted soil was landfilled. Again, winter access, very remote. So with that, there was some kind of things left hanging in previous reporting with showing exceedances on site. So this one was fairly straightforward, and we started looking at, well, were the right guidelines applied? What are the issues where the receptors, with kind of very straightforward changes, going away from using the most stringent and looking at applying the drilling waste guidelines, which were applicable, EC and SAR, by just applying the proper drilling waste guidelines. There's no issue. So that just left us with, we had chloride in some watering wells on site that was above the guideline, but the main source was removed. Again, no receptor. So you have that guideline exceedance. You have multiple years of groundwater assessment that you basically have to fly in with a helicopter to get, and it just showed that there's no risk there. And along with that, there was some hydrocarbon kind of remnant left behind that couldn't be accessed, and it was done pre-remote green zone guidelines. So looking at that, just by simply applying those remote green zone guidelines, we were good on the hydrocarbon side. So basically, a very easy case to make that this site does not need to be accessed again. It is well on its way to recovery. It is already reclaimed and doesn't need any further work. And that's an example of a pretty easy sign off and an agreement with AER that you can move the site forward. So the last kind of site overview here is we used existing guidelines in a little different way. we knew going into this site, just based on the phase one, that there was going to be a large impacted diesel invert sump. Just looking at the drilling waste records, there was a lot of diesel added to the drilling muds. Late 70s drill, very deep hole, eastern slopes. It's one of those sites where before you even drill it, you know it's going to be heavily impacted. So we went in with a plan right from the start to do a DUA exclusion because we knew we were going to be up against hydrocarbons. So we did that. Pretty easy exclusion. There was heavy clays there, a lot of impacts as expected. And then it really came down to the F2, F3 was the driver. And so that's the main thing is once you have the data, you gotta look and see like what makes sense on this site. So right after that assessment, we pretty much immediately went into a variance because again, this is winter access site. It worked well having that kind of direct contact with the regulator and just letting them know on timelines that we have to make a plan and move on it. And they were very receptive and gave us a quick turnaround on feedback there. So what we did was we applied the remote green zone guidelines on the site. It met all the requirements to check it off as being remote green zone, with the only exception of instead of being 20 meters within the exclusion zone of the green zone, it was 12 kilometers. So that we based it on that everything else is the same as any other remote green zone. There's no access, very limited access to public. It's going to be reclaimed to a forested area, just like what's adjacent to it. But just in doing that, we made a huge difference in what our impact depths were. So we went from basically having to remediate from near surface to 7.5 meters, quite a deep sump, quite large volumes. We reduced that by applying those remote green zone guidelines to now we can focus on remediation to 1.5 meters. So again, part of the variance was we're not trying to walk away from a site. We're not trying to hide from doing work. We're trying to make sure we focus that money to the right work, to spend clients' money wisely, and then focus on the true problem sites. And something like this where you're remediating to 1.5 meters, you're reducing or removing any kind of receptor pathway, cap that with clay, and you can move on with the site. So again, with that, we had savings of about $350,000 and reduced the number of trucks on the road by about 165. So definitely a worthwhile kind of approach to take to reduce your remediation volumes. So now I'll kind of run through the value and how it applies on sites. And it's not just the dollar value. When you look at it kind of from a sustainability perspective, you look at the 3 pillars. So environmental, the goal is to have less damage to a functioning ecosystem. I think that's something, again, like from those pictures I showed previously, we can look at in more detail of, does it make sense to be tearing up these sites that are well vegetated, the trees are well in place, and is it really a risk to leave that material in place? And just the other one, just quite simply burning less diesel. Like the amount of effort, equipment time to get in there, to get at this material, to get it out, to get it to landfill, it just doesn't make good sense a lot of times to be spending that much time and effort, and again, fuel to get at that material. From a social side, faster site closure, we can kind of focus more to the higher risk sites. less orphan wells. I know it's definitely not the answer to that, but the more and faster we can remove sites from the list, then they don't have that opportunity to end up as an orphan well. A big one, fewer trucks on the road, just from a safety standpoint to the public. That's a big one to me, but really the biggest one that keeps me up at night when I have crews working on these remote sites is that just the high risk of this winter work and decreasing that wherever we can. There's a lot of extra safety side that comes into traveling on winter roads, traveling in dark conditions, on, and just you want to avoid that as much as you can, just from a social standpoint, to keeping people safe. And then obviously economic, that's a big one that every client is going to look at. Just quite simply, it costs less. You're focused on remediating material that truly needs to be remediated and focusing your costs there. And with that, it's not clients and oil and gas in general in Canada, I feel gets a bad rap for how they approach things. Like they do things right and spend a lot of budget and a lot of time on these sites, and that budget's not going to go away. It's not going to be saved and just sent back to shareholders. It's going to be focused on bigger problem sites, and it just allows more resources to focus on what truly is a problem and leave these sites alone that just really have no real risk to any receptor. So again, these photos kind of tie into the question of remediation. Is it always the best option? The photo here on the right, I like to show this to any of our kind of junior intermediate field staff that are going out into these green zone sites like that. That's an example of poor communication. A lot of times there's client operations, contractors, others working on clearing sites, site access. That's an example of clearing a site for access for a phase 2 because the proper communication didn't happen, and we could have reduced that. We needed to get into that site. We could have reduced our footprint by a lot, and you can see that there's a huge reclamation setback by what happened there. So that's the biggest one that I stress with everybody is just clear the area that you need to truly find there's an issue, and then beyond that, truly find that you need to dig it up. And if you can leave it in place, leave it in place. The other two pictures here are back to that heavily contaminated site. Just an example of, if you look in the center, that's our wells we've used for in situ work and different pilot testing, and we have impacts at 15 meters in bedrock. The biggest disturbance on that site that bothers the landowner is what we're doing. It's not the impacts there, and we've shown that the impacts are stabilized, hydrocarbons aren't moving. It's a borderline DUA. However, there's no houses within 5 kilometers. Is that something that needs to be continually monitored and disrupting basically the landowner's farming of that site? You can see that's the same site with a moose in the background. Like, it's a very functioning site, but it remains as a contaminated site and will so for a very long time. So that's the kind of sites that I'm working towards getting more closure on risk side of things. And it's not as easy as the other sites I've shown, but it's a good example of focusing on what needs to be remediated. So now I'll kind of go over some of our learnings that we've had. And our learnings, we've always, with these variants, you want to present a good case. I want to give a good sufficient summary so the regulator can see what the issues and risks are. You want to choose the right site. You don't want to be pushing through sites that you don't have good backing on. You want well-assessed sites. You definitely have to take a look if you need more supporting information before you submit. and it works really well incorporating into your remediation plan. So having those upfront discussions. Organized is important. You want to have a concise, orderly information request to send in so they can get a really good understanding of what the site features are and what the issues are. And identifying the risk. So risks is subjective, so that's got to really consider that. For someone like myself, I've seen a lot of really bad sites, so my level of risk has quite a range where other people kind of don't have that background. And so we don't want to overload the system with sites that are non-issues or that are unsupported. So just to finish out some upcoming changes that we've seen, even as yesterday I had some discussions. So there's a new submission category coming. It's no longer going to fall under a variance request. This is everything I talked about. Is they're still looking at how AER is going to finalize it, but it's going to be more of a request for guideline modification. With submissions, that is currently changing as of right now. That it's instead of we previously would put them through REM-REC questions, these are now going to go through CSU submissions. So that's a definite change. They've also requested a record of site condition with any submission. So we're going to have to make sure you have those completed and fully filled out for all reporting and background on the site. And then with the remote green zone guidelines, as I discussed, that's going to now require pre-approval from public lands prior to submission in the buffer area. So AER won't sign off on it unless it has pre-approval. So that's definitely a change that has just come up in the last while. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, and yeah, if anyone has questions, call me directly, or my email's there as well.
Thanks very much, Jason, and I'll keep the program moving. So I'll ask, I did get a question that came in from Lynette Essick. So Lynette, I'll ask you to just send an email with copy that question and send it to Jason. But thanks very much, Jason. Very interesting and a very important trend given all the money that's being invested by the governments in rehabilitation and reclamation in the 3 Western provinces. So let's move on right now to our next presentation. It'll be given by Brandon Smith, and it's bridging the gap between large environmental data sets and sound decision making. So thanks again, Jason, and I guess we don't want everybody clapping. Let's move on.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, Bill, and the previous presenters in this technology session. And are you going to get set up here, Brandon?
We can't hear you again, Brandon.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Lynette. We see the presentation.
Okay, thank you. So again, thanks, Bill, and the previous presenters in this technology session. Good morning. Thanks, Joe and Isa, for hosting this virtual conference. We really appreciated all the information that's been shared over the last 2 days, especially those regulatory updates. Again, my name is Lynette Isak, and I'm a senior soil scientist working with Analythium. I'm going to share my pain with managing big data and my challenges in trying to communicate quickly and effectively using our current PDF reporting systems. We plan on sharing some of Analythium's solutions to being able to bridge that gap between the massive data and sound business decision making. I'm a co-presenter today with Brandon Smith. Brandon will describe our unique and effective approach. He's a risk assessor with experience in the sectors of oil and gas, mining, and agriculture. Khalid, a soil data scientist and Analythium's president and co-founder, will be available at the end of the presentation to help answer any technical questions. So our presentation is in 2 parts, and I'll be sharing my story as part of part 1. So I have a real problem, and I need a solution. Massive data sets and cumbersome reports. With over 25 years experience as an environmental and regulatory specialist, and like most of you, I've worked in most of the sectors in Alberta, that oil and gas, oil sands, coal, pipeline, you name it. I believe we all have a part of we've all been part of what I call the environmental assessment and monitoring movement of the last 2 to 3 decades, where all we've been doing, it seems to be, is collecting more and more data. The collection of data parameters have also changed for many reasons over the years, and this is maddening. But however, it's understandable due to the continuing changes in methodology and guidelines. It has made the massive data sets difficult and time-consuming to manage and update. And guess what? We all seem to continue to deliver these very cumbersome and outdated reports. Currently, most of the data I present is static. You know, those PDF formats, whether table, graph, maps, and the reports are hundreds of pages long. I'm a problem solver, but I want to be a better problem solver. I'm frustrated with the status quo. I'm not doing what I want to do, and I'm doing what others can do better and quicker in terms of data management. So what is my wish list? Well, I want to upload data. I want to click on an app on my iPhone or my tablet, and I want to trust that the information was cleaned and transformed, that I can use it. It seems so simple. I just want to make clear and concise visual recommendations and in real time. My business and regulatory goals can then be met faster. Ultimately, I need to be able to make statistical and science-based decisions for my project to be able to determine what my goals are, where residual effects, developing those mitigation and management programs, closing sites, and ultimately reducing liability. I have researched and talked to many of my colleagues about my problem and for what is out there for solutions. Sadly, there seems to be a lack of cohesive data management communication tools. So again, I ask myself, why are we not there yet in our environmental industry? Now, to be clear, I have real pain points, these massive data sets that I currently can't manage effectively. So I'm asking, how many of you can relate to my problem that I just shared? Now I'll turn over the presentation to Brendan, who will describe some new and innovative solutions that Analythium is working on. Brandon?
Great, thanks, Lynette. Just a quick audio check. Everyone hears me fine?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I think Lynette really hit the nail on the head there with respect to some of my own pain points and probably a lot of those people who have tuned in today. So I've been a risk assessor for about a decade, and my job pretty much boils down to, is there a current risk? Is there going to be a future risk? Or can we really say there's no risk at all? And at face value, that should be a pretty simple thing to work through. But the truth is, it's not, and it's not for a whole number of reasons. So one of those things is that, we all sit on these massive piles of data, and they come from different places. So they come from field data, they come in interviews, they're analytical data, they come from the lab, site-specific information, regional information, they're historical reports that embody a lot of those same things. And then, of course, there's georeference data, like where did I actually collect this? And the problem is that for each of these, we silo that information. Our field data is in hard copies, our analytical data comes in different ways. Maybe we store it in Microsoft Access or, a third party like an Equus or an ESDET. Maybe that data is actually still in just a PDF format somewhere. Regional data, we all use Agrisid and Abadata, online resources. We've got historical reports. How many people have had to go to cold storage and dig through an old box to try to find out where the information's at? And of course, we've got our georeference data, and that data comes in different formats. We've got GIS, we've got CAD, maybe it's still PDF. You have to go to find that old borehole log to find where was that drilled on my site. We have so much data, we've actually devoted departments to dealing with it. And at the end of the day, we try to take this information and convey it in a static report. It's a 100-page document that's pretty much, for me, the embodiment of everything I hated. The tables are in a database, the figures are in ARC, the report is text and based on static data. And worse, these arrows all go in one direction, right? So for those that need to make business decisions, they're effectively stuck with whatever report they've received, and there's not really an easy pathway to go back. Trying to go back to it incurs more cost, it generates lag time. One of the most scariest things I get is a client that receives a report and says, I just want to see it a little different. Okay, great. Now I've got to figure out, what does that mean to my database group? How does my database group now have to contact my figures group to make sure that the report we reissue is all aligned? But what if there's a better way? So to figure out if there's a better way, we really need to start thinking about, like, what is data? What is data science? The Oxford Dictionary describes it as data sets that need to be analyzed. Well, data to me means a lot more than just the number of lines on an Excel sheet. You know, large data isn't just the number of data points. It's also not simply how many times you sample a parameter. There's something more there. There's what is it to actually reveal patterns? You know, there's trends, there's associations, and how do we get there? How do we pull that out? So traditionally, we find ourselves stuck sort of in this situation. You know, it's a management paradigm. They teach it if you take a management course, but it's time, cost, quality. And unfortunately, you can pick two, but the third will suffer. So I need information fast, and I want it of high quality. Well, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Okay, I have a fixed budget, and I still need it fast. That's fine, but the quality is going to be less. You know, so at Analythium, we started thinking about this. Well, what do we do to achieve all three? You know, I want it fast, I want it for less money, and I need the quality of it to be higher than what I've ever received before. But how do you do that? Well, you need to think different. You need to achieve this by bringing in specialists. So, you know, we brought in a computer scientist, a software developer, a machine learning expert, a statistician, a mathematician. And we brought all these domain experts, and we stuck them under a roof. And I said, look, we have a problem and I need a solution, but the solution can't be the programmer's solution. It can't be the needs of me as a risk assessor. We need something that functions very stringently in what our tangible results are, but is flexible enough that each of us can have our own biases on the outcome. So, you know, remember this horrible image? What if instead of everything coming in siloed, we figured out a way to have a local repository and that spoke in everyone's language? You know, and better yet, what if that visualization was actually not a static report, but an application, you know, like a web interface or something to that effect? And what if you could interact with your database? So you can go back and forth. You know, now I'm developing requests and actioning results that are tangible. You know, that report interface is live. Now my client who has decisions they want to make can make them on their own. You know, it's a two-way street. It's not me acting as a gatekeeper. And what if that system was designed to be intuitive and simple? And I emphasize simple is really meaning efficient. So this is an application developed for COVID. We'd hoped to present a facility groundwater program, but ultimately COVID delayed that project. So I'm going to present on COVID, but the message is really the same here. So digitizing complex data is now the world that we live in. You know, frankly, static reporting is a bygone era. It has use, but it should be for, you know, regulatory submissions if needed or record keeping for legal purposes. In my opinion, it's really got no place conveying data to clients. You know, so a way to picture this is the regions here in the sort of center. Picture that could be your portfolio of sites. Or perhaps it's a map of a facility and those different regions are sub-areas or apex. The image to the right is data changing over time. You know, it's automated, it's in real time. It comes immediately from the lab, and as soon as it's issued, it pops up here. And if needed, you can export it to PDF if you'd like, but there's no necessity for me to talk to a drafter to build out my figures. You know, it's automated, it's easy to access. I can have it on my phone, my computer, my tablet. I can have it when I'm at my kid's soccer game. And everyone can come back to this central point, and we all speak the same language because it's been built to be able to do that. You know, how much nicer would it be if a client could take your data in the way that you presented it and do something like this? You know, I'm interested in what was going on in High River. It automates it, it selects it, I can see it. You know, because this is COVID, we're using cases per 1,000 people, but this could easily be a contaminant of concern that you've selected that you want to look at. And I can change it through time, and I can export to PDF, and I can take this and I can present it to my colleagues. We can have a discussion around our data. But there's still a gap. So we can automate and make visualization. So what? You know, there's tons of applications that already do that, but I challenge you on the notion. Have you actually integrated digital learning, or have you just automated the way you used to do things, right? Like Enpo, SiteView, Arcadis Online. These are all tools that make getting into our individual silos easier. You know, I can pull a table up for a well on a map, and it'll give me some information, or I can see a repository of reports that are in PDF, and I can track my vendors and my invoices, which is basically what we do with most of that software. But as I mentioned, we're really collectively at the stage of just only able to do 2 of those 3 paradigms. You know, we've figured out how to reduce time and cost, but we've really not said anything about increasing quality. And that's the point where most people are failing, because they've automated the process, but in doing so, we've either made it exceedingly hard to use the program, or we lost the thread for why we were trying to do it in the first place. So for me, you know, as I said, I'm a risk assessor. So I just need to know, like, is it a risk now? Is it going to be a risk in the future? Or is it never going to be a risk? But why in so many reports do we always fall back on, you know, we need data? And I think where it comes from is that I need my information efficiently. I need it in a timely manner. And I need it to be clear, because I can have the best, I guess, description of my data, but if I can't communicate that clearly, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You know, my process, if it to me makes a ton of sense, but to the person who needs to use it to make a business decision can't read my mind, we're lost in translation. You know, so one of the things that I think speaks to that problem is we have so much data. We have chemical parameters, we have temporal variability, we have elevation data. I have data that I look at, which is usually restricted to, you know, concentrations of contaminants, but somebody else might think of the data that they need to look at in a totally different way, and we're just not communicating. So sometimes it really is hard to see the forest for the trees. And oftentimes we do the same thing, which is, you know, oh, I have an increasing trend and I don't really understand exactly why, or I didn't quite get delineation, or I believe I have a perception that I didn't get delineation. So what's the end thing? Well, let's assess it again next year. You know, we'll build the database. We'll keep getting more information. But if we already have all the information we need, getting more isn't going to get us to the answer, right? So here's something pretty simple. You know, what do we see here? It's a figure. It's a bit better than an Excel table, I guess. Along the x-axis is the months of the year. This could be spread out to multiple years if you're thinking like a groundwater network. Again, this was COVID, so these are cases on the y-axis, but pretty easy to conceptualize. So this could easily be, you know, chloride over time or something to that effect. So we have our data. It's a little bit better. It's not a table, and it kind of looks like this, right? That's sort of what I'm seeing. But that doesn't tell me too much. Now, what if embedded in the system, it already allowed for statistical smoothing and analysis? And what if we trusted the system to do this for us automated? You know, this is the same data, but it's starting to tell a different story. You know, I'm starting to see two peaks where I kind of thought there was just one. And what if I gave you a little more data and I actually provided you some information? Okay, now I see this is COVID cases. These are two peaks. You know, I see that there was a lockdown on March 17th in Alberta, and there was some social distancing. I see that the peak still increased, and you know, they told us we should expect this because there's people that contract COVID, but you're asymptomatic for a certain duration of time. You know, and then it started to come down. You know, that we always call it the flattening of the curve. So we started to see that, and then something weird happened. We actually see a second peak, and through the analysis, you know, Alberta Health identified it was a meat processing plant where there was still a lot of community transmission going on. Well, they closed that, and then we saw a flattening of the curve again. Now, imagine that this data, the way it's presented, was given to you or to Alberta Health 6 months from now. You know, let's say that they got all this information, but they got it because we wrote it for the March deadline for, you know, a year-end report. Because that's what we do now, right? Like, we have all this data at our fingertips, but because we have to go through the process to write a report, we don't have actionable intelligence of our data. We have these static bits and pieces that we bring along the way. So, you know, what I'm stressing to everyone is, what if we had data live, and what if we had quality? You know, what if we could make sound decisions based on how we present that data in real time? So how do we actually get there? You know, from the very start, what we've looked to do at Analytium is work to develop a clear picture of what baseline is. You know, what are the needs of the project? For other risk assessors out there, you can almost think of this as like, what's the conceptual model? Where do I need to get to, and what's the problem I'm trying to identify? The next step, once we've figured out that, is to automate. You know, data acquisition needs to be done intelligently. Just collecting data for the purpose of collecting data, it serves no real purpose. You know, we need to bring that information into a system that allows it to be optimized in real-time controls. I don't want a huge table in a PDF. I can't feel the data. I can't select data ranges. At least I can't easily. I need someone else's support. I can't select contaminants that are on my own bias of what's important. You know, I need it to be like a tweet. Like, I wanted a click button in as few words as possible, and I need that information, you know, yesterday. So we get the acquisition, we understand that. So now, how do we validate it? I want to know that automated validation is sound science. I don't necessarily need to know why non-parametric or parametric matters or how a non-detect will skew data. It's important, but I also don't need to know why an N of 10 is treated differently than an N of 500. You know, what I care about is that somebody in the process has assured to me that it's defensible, that it can be validated if I'm requested to do so, and that it's simple and trustworthy, right? So if I'm asked and they want transparency in the process, I can click a few buttons and hit send. I want it to be optimized. I want to tell that same that same story, you know, but I want to tell it in as few words as necessary. So going back to sort of like a facility monitoring network kind of analogy, you know, what about a reduction of analytes? Can I test less parameters but still come up with the same answer? What about sampling frequencies? You know, what about less times monitoring per year? Statistically relevant to make those assumptions. Sampling intensity. I want to reduce the number of networks in the monitoring wells in the network whilst achieving that same level of monitoring accuracy. You know, ultimately it's all trying to get to the same point, which is environmental protection. But now we have a higher level, in my opinion, because we're actually integrating sound science. And then the question is, well, how do we integrate? You know, the future of reporting isn't static data. You know, static data it draws insights from data that's collected at some finite moment, and it's very rigid. You know, there's not a lot of room for manipulation, modifiers, user interfaces. None of that exists when you export to PDF. So what I want is integration to be a two-way street. I want to be able to do it myself, but I want to give it to my client and allow them to be able to see it as well. So, you know, these processes, when we don't apply them, they really do cause unnecessary delays in actioning appropriate response. So in summary, you know, companies invest huge money into data acquisition. We build it through multi-platform integrations. We talk about the supply chain of information and who's our data holders. And we have these great tools, but really nobody uses them. Or we use them, but we only use them for what we want. You know, we subscribe to this software company and they manage our environmental sites. Okay, but they manage it. How does that information come to you? Can you interact with it? So our process has been really to expedite this through programming and data science. Have the two-way communication to understand how to bring a programmer and a data scientist in so you actually see the connections between the dots that maybe you never saw before. To do that, you know, to build something innovative requires innovation. You have to have a cross-disciplinary team with widely different skill sets. We can't fall back on the old, at least this has happened to me multiple times. We can't fall back on the old saying, you know, Jim has a statistics degree in his grad class and he does all our statistics. Okay, but he didn't go to school to be a statistician, right? Like find a statistician to help bring you that insight. So we have customizable platforms and solution them to the tailored needs of your client. Don't make a program that only selects certain types of visualizations because however you built it is already biased. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be customizable by the end user. And then what about quality? You know, how do we keep defensible, repeatable, and trustworthy reporting? Well, we've sought out leaders in computing science. You know, seek out the best. You can't build the world's best steakhouse if you stock your pantry with vegan ingredients. Like, if you have a vision of where you think the end goal is, you need to let the chefs that you've hired to help you get there pick out the ingredients that you need to have. Lots of times we talk about, you know, it would be great to have an automated reporting system. Let's hire a programmer and have them automate it by taking the Excel sheets we already use and just changing the programming language. Okay, but maybe that's not the quality you're looking for. Maybe what the quality you're looking for is to understand how to completely change the way that you even acquire data. Visualization and optimization is key. Again, you can have a great process and the quality can be top notch, but if you can't communicate it or optimize it for a client, are they even going to use it? So where next? You know, I know, listen, we've built out these integrations, and I do stress for anyone who hasn't to go to the COVID app and just play around with it because it's top of mind for most people. So where are we going next? So our next steps that we're interested in is, deep learning, building out repetitive case models that allow applications to actually evolve. So where I'm trying to get to that is, what if the applications you use actually looked at how you view your own data and then optimize the visualizations for your own personal biases? Now I'm looking at 500 sites in my portfolio, but the system itself is flagging the ones that I should look at because it's learning for the things that I usually look at, because that's how I make my business decisions. So this is where technology is going. This is where Analythium's mindset is, and we're fresh to this industry, not in terms of our personal, like I've been a risk assessor in industry for a very long time, but Analythium and the way it builds analytics and looks at this is fresh, and fresh insight requires collaboration. So for anyone who's viewing this and is thinking, this is interesting, like where do we go? I'd really stress to keep the conversation going, and I've got Lynette and Khalid here on this webinar with me, and with that, I'd really like to open it up for questions from the audience.
Thanks, Brandon and Lynette and Khalid. Bill had to step away as our moderator. He got called away to something else, so I'm stepping in. So if there's any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box or in the question box, and we'll get to them. I'm going to thank, while I'm waiting, I'd like to thank all the speakers today in this first session, and thank Bill for moderating. Okay. And our first question is, where can we find the COVID app?
If you want to go to the Analythium website, analythium.io, the app is right on there.
Okay, so it's easy to find right on the front page?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any other questions for the team at Analythium? Okay, I don't see anything else, so their information's on the screen, so please, if you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to each of them and ask the questions. They'll be more than happy to help you. So thank you again. Thanks to everyone for attending the first session. We'll take a little break here to grab some much needed coffee, and we'll move on to at 11 o'clock to our next session. So thank you everyone this morning for your attendance and participation. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Lynette.
Thank you, Joe.